So numbers I have, Pew Research Center found that we lost about 40,000 newsroom jobs between '08 and 20. Why are these newspapers shutting down? Is it because we're so perfect that you have nothing to cover? Or perhaps there's a lot to cover, but there's not enough reporters. Could you answer why they're shutting down?
So you're right to recognize that there is plenty to cover, and the value in the audience is exponentially increasing every year. Like I said, it's the opposite trajectory when it comes to the revenue that returns to us because we have two dominant intermediaries who sit in between us and our readers. 70% of our traffic is relied upon, so we have no choice but to acquiesce to their terms of letting them crawl, scrape, and place our content within their walled gardens where users are ingesting right now images, snippets, featured snippets, and now soon AI, which will make them just never leave the platform because it's by design personalized to get personal information to then target users with advertising using our content to engage those users in the first place. And so if there's no return to those who create the original content that's distributed by the monopoly dominant platforms, then we're just not going to be able to pay journalists who create the quality in the first place.
Exactly. Mr. Lynch, do you have any choice over whether you are able to decide whether your content is used to train AI models? And do you have a choice about whether to let them scrape your content or not?
It's a somewhat complicated issue. The answer is they've already used it. The models are already trained. And so where you hear some of the AI companies say that they are creating or allow opt-outs, it's great. They've already trained their models. The only thing the opt-outs will do is to prevent a new competitor from training new models to compete with them. So the opt-out of the training is too late, frankly. The other side of the equation is the output. So remember, the models need to be trained. Then they need access to content, current content, to respond to queries. So in the case of search companies, if you opt out of the output, you have to opt out of all of their search. Search is the lifeblood of digital publishers. Most digital publishers, half or more of their traffic originates from a search engine. If you cut off your search engine, you cut off your business. Mm-hmm. So there's not a way to opt out of the output side of it, letting it have access to your content for the outputs, retrieval, augmentation, and generation, without opting out of search.
So you have a dominant search engine, like 90% with Google. And so then you pay fees, right, to get this content to get to you. Is that right? You said in your testimony, Ms. Coffey, you explained that when users click through to news sites, big tech gets fees for web traffic. Is that right?
Yes, the ad tech tax, that's correct. That's
for the ad tech, right?
Right.
And so, but then if you want to opt out of the AI model, you'll be opting out of what is for many news organizations now, the monopoly model that you're forced to use is the only way to get to your site.
Correct. You'd opt out of search.
Got it down. Okay, so last question. In addition to the licensing issues my colleagues have raised in ways we can clarify that, is the bill that Senator Kennedy and I have. And Mr. Lynch, in your testimony, you explained that Australia's news media bargaining code has been successful in leading to negotiations between tech platforms and news organizations. And people have to understand these are trillion-dollar companies, and sometimes you'll have a tiny newspaper for a town of 1,000 people, and they won't even return their calls. And can you talk about how the success of the new laws in Australia and actually in Canada have supported journalism and led to the hiring of additional journalists?
Yes, there's been reporting out of Australia that the $140 million that has flowed back to news organizations and publishers there have resulted in hiring or in rehiring of journalists. So, you know, the first thing we have to do is, as you heard from Ms. Coffey earlier, about the decline, you know, what was the cause of the decline, the number of reporters. In this last year alone, 8,000 journalists have lost their jobs in the U.S. and Canada and the U.K. So the first thing is to stop that decline, because that decline, I would argue, undermines democracy, undermines the fourth estate. And And the way to do that is to ensure there's compensation for the use of this content. There's adequate, I think, evidence now from what's happened in Australia and now in Canada that the big tech companies didn't fall over, their business models continued on, and now journalism is starting to flourish again in these markets.
And just, Ms. Coffey, anything you want to add to that, and I'm done.
We can send something. It's back on the labor index that shows that journalist jobs spiked afterwards and have plateaued and then have steadily rose.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Blackburn.
Which is important. Welcome, Senator Klobuchar. You're up next.
Thank you very much, Senator Petilla. Thank you, all of you, to talk about that. You're here to talk about our progress after 5 years. I was honored to be here and support the First Step Act and work on some of the provisions. So this is a really big deal. And I want to start with you, Mr. Smith. I was a former member of the District Attorneys Association, as you know, and I also know that support of prosecutors across the country, not every single one of them, but your association was really important in getting this done. And talk about why that was as prosecutors. I think that kind of jars people sometimes, but one of the things I would always argue is, we're not like a business in every way in a prosecutor's office in that we don't want to see repeat customers. We want people to be able to go on with their lives like Mr. Charles has done. And could you just talk about the importance of the reduction of recidivism?
Senator, I referenced before about crime fighting, and I think that the general public sometimes thinks these measures are soft on crime, and they're not. This is just a different form of crime fighting. Crime prevention is just as important to protecting the public as taking the person who committed the crime off the street. And so we were in support of the First Step Act because it was common sense, it was practical stuff that targeted low-risk offenders through proven data points, and the numbers bear out. You guys did a great job. I mean, look at the recidivism rate, 46%. I mean, that's incredible. There's no one that can argue with those numbers.
Right. So you've got the Justice Department numbers that nearly 30,000 who were released under the First Step Act, only 12% recidivated compared to the overall Bureau of Prison recidivism rate, which is more than 46%. That's correct, right?
Yep, correct. So once again, we as prosecutors take our oath to protect the public very seriously. But I think sometimes we just get a bad rap. I mean, it seems like half of the people think we're too tough on people, we're putting everybody in crime. Then you got the other half of the people that are saying, oh, you're too soft. You're letting people out too early. But I thought we thought at NDAA the First Step Act struck a great balance, and it proved out with the data.
Yeah, Mr. Charles, thank you so much for being here and sharing your experience. For years, Senator Cornyn and I led the One Stop Shop Community Reentry Program Act to help former inmates reintegrate into their communities by creating resource centers that help them find jobs, housing, mental health services, substance abuse treatment. For years before I was a DA, I actually was involved in a volunteer program called Amicus and visited a woman at the women's prison for nearly 10 years. And I just saw this need when you're there every single month and get to know someone for what the plan is when they get out. So could you talk about, as someone who works to get inmates ready to reintegrate into their communities, can you talk about the importance of ensuring that people continue to have access to recidivism reduction programs once they're released from custody?
Thank you, Senator. And I also want to thank you for your work in reentry. Having reentry resources available once some person is released is vital to them being successful. I myself ran into hurdles when I was released. I couldn't find housing. And because I couldn't find housing, my stability was weakened. But thankfully, I had a friend who allowed me to stay with them for about 4 months until I was able to get my footing. So being able to have these reentry resources available for those that are returning to society allows them to have the support so that they can be productive, so that they can go on and be successful in their lives and in the lives of their family members. So without those things, including the programs that are now placed in the prison because of the First Step Act, allows those people to be able to learn vocational educational skills and trades so that once they are released, they will be able to find employment. So those hurdles that most people run into once they're released from incarceration is housing, is employment, is transportation. So if the resources are available or organizations that are available that provide those things, that person is less likely to recidivate.
Exactly. Last question, Mr. Markle. You served special education teacher for the Bureau of Prisons. Thank you for that for over 20 years. And talk about, I know there's some wait lists as we look at these numbers, which I just discussed with Mr. Smith, that are so positive, but talk about how wait lists to access First Step Act educational programs could negatively impact the goals of the Act and what Congress can do to improve the implementation. I know you talked a little bit about these programs with Senator Booker, but if you could talk about specifically wait lists.
Thank you, Senator. With the implementation of the First Step Act, obviously education and programming and everything that we do became very popular. So obviously inmates wanted to be involved in programs that sometimes had been forgotten. We've always done GED and special education, but it's now emphasized by the First Step Act. So we can fill what we can fill with the amount of teachers that we have, the amount of staff and resources we have. We fill the classes up. When we're able to be in the actual classrooms teaching and not being pulled to different assignments, we do our best to move through those. So inmates are on waiting lists. Some additions were made to where they are receiving credit for being on wait lists, but that's a problem too because an inmate is not receiving the actual programming or the benefits from the First Step Act, but they're still earning the credits. So the biggest problem is just we need the resources and the staff to continue to push forward to eliminate the wait lists and actually get people into classrooms so they can receive the benefits from the First Step Act.
Thank you, and thank you as well, Mr. Smith, for your work. I have to head out, but I'll send you a question in writing. I'm sure it'll be very exciting. So, thank you.
Thank you. And
Senator Klobuchar is next. She's been quite a leader on the subject for quite a long time on the SHIELD Act and with Senator Cornyn on the revenge porn legislation. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Chairman Durbin, and thank you, Ranking Member Graham, for those words. I couldn't agree more. For too long, we have been seeing the social media companies turn a blind eye when kids have joined these platforms in record numbers. They have used algorithms that push harmful content because that content got popular. They provided a venue, maybe not knowingly at first, but for dealers to sell deadly drugs like fentanyl. Our own head of our Drug Enforcement Administration has said they've basically been captured by the cartels in Mexico and in China. So I strongly support, first of all, the Stop CSAM bill. I agree with Senator Graham that nothing is going to change unless we open up the courtroom doors. I think the time for all of this immunity is done because I think money talks even stronger than we talk up here. 2 of the 5 bills, as noted, are my bills with Senator Cornyn. One has actually passed through the Senate, but is waiting action in the House. But the other one is the SHIELD Act, and I do support, appreciate the support of that bill. This is about revenge porn. The FBI director testified before this committee. There's been over 20 suicides of kids attributed to online revenge porn in just the last year. But for those parents out there and those families, this is for them about their own child, but it's also about making sure this doesn't happen to other children. I know because I've talked to these parents. Parents like Bridget Noring from Hastings, Minnesota, who is out there today. Bridget lost her teenage son after he took a fentanyl lace pill that he purchased on the internet. Amy Neville is also here. Platform got the pill. Amy Neville is also here. Her son Alexander was only 14, when he died after taking a pill he didn't know was actually fentanyl. We're starting a law enforcement campaign, One Pill Kills, in Minnesota, going to the schools with the sheriffs and law enforcement. But the way to stop it is, yes, at the border and at the points of entry, but we know that 30% some of the people that are getting the fentanyl are getting it off the platforms. Meanwhile, social media platforms generated $11 billion in revenue in 2022 from advertising directed at children and teenagers, including nearly $2 billion in ad profits derived from users age 12 and under. When a Boeing plane lost a door in mid-flight several weeks ago, nobody questioned the decision to ground a fleet of over 700 planes. So why aren't we taking the same type of decisive action on the danger of these platforms when we know these kids are dying? We have bills that have passed through this incredibly diverse committee when it comes to our political views, that have passed through this committee, and they should go to the floor. We should do something finally about liability, and then we should turn to some of the other issues that a number of us have worked on when it comes to the charges for app stores and when it comes to some of the monopoly behavior and the self-preferencing. But I'm going to stick with this today. Facts. 1/3 of fentanyl cases investigated over 5 months had direct ties to social media. That's from the DEA. Facts. Between 2012 and 2022, cyber tip line reports of online child sexual exploitation increased from 415,000 to more than 32 million. And as I noted, at least 20 victims committed suicide in sextortion cases. So I'm going to start with that, with you, Mr. Citron. My bill with Senator Cornyn, the SHIELD Act, includes a threat provision that would help protection and accountability for those that are threatened by these predators. Young kids get a picture, send it in, think they got a new girlfriend or a new boyfriend, ruins their life, or they think it's going to be ruined, and they kill themselves. So could you tell me why you're not supporting the SHIELD Act?
Senator, we think it's very important that teens have a safe experience on our platforms. I think that the portion to strengthen law enforcement's ability to investigate crimes against children and hold bad actors accountable is
So are you holding open that you may support it?
We very much would like to have conversations with you. We're open to discussing further, and we do welcome legislation and regulation. You know, this is a very important issue for our country, and we've been prioritizing safety for teens.
Thank you. I'm much more interested in if you support it, because there's been so much talk at these hearings and popcorn throwing and the like, and I just want to get this stuff done. I'm so tired of this. It's been 28 years, since the internet. We haven't passed any of these bills because everyone's double talk. It's time to actually pass them. And the reason they haven't passed is because of the power of your company. So let's be really, really clear about that. So what you say matters. Your words matter. Mr. Chu, I'm a co-sponsor of Chair Dermot's Stop CSAM Act of 2023, along with Senator Hawley, who's the lead Republican, I believe, which, among other things, empowers victims by making it easier for them to ask tech companies to remove the material and related imagery from their platforms. Why would you not support this bill?
Senator, we largely support it. I think the spirit of it is very aligned with what we want to do. There are questions about implementation that I think companies like us and some other groups have, and we look forward to asking those. And of course, if this legislation is law, we will comply.
Mr. Spiegel, I know we talked ahead of time. I do appreciate your company's support for the Cooper Davis Act, which will finally, it's a bill with Senator Shaheen and Marshall, which will allow law enforcement to do more when it comes to fentanyl. I think you know what a problem this is. Devin Noring, teenager from Hastings, I mentioned his mom here, suffered dental pain and migraines, so he bought what he thought was a Percocet over Snap, but instead he bought a counterfeit drug laced with a lethal dose of fentanyl. As his mom, who's here with us today, said, all of the hopes and dreams we as parents had for Devin were erased in the blink of an eye, and no mom should have to bury their kid. Talk about why you support the Cooper-Davis Act.
Senator, thank you. We strongly support the Cooper-Davis Act, and we believe it will help DEA go after the cartels and get more dealers off the streets to save more lives.
Okay. Are there others that support that bill on this? No. Okay. Last, Mr. Zuckerberg. In 2021, the Wall Street Journal reported on internal Meta research documents asking, why do we care about tweens? These were internal documents. I'm quoting the documents. And answering its own question by citing Meta internal emails. They are a valuable but untapped audience. At a commerce hearing, I'm also on that committee, I asked Meta's head of global safety why children aged 10 to 12 are so valuable to Meta. She responded, we do not knowingly attempt to recruit people who aren't old enough to use our apps. Well, when the 42 state attorneys general, Democrat and Republican, brought their case, they said this statement was inaccurate. Few examples. In 2021, she received an email, Ms. Davis, from Instagram's research director saying that Instagram is investing in experiencing targeting young age roughly 10 to 12. In a February 2021 instant message, one of your employees wrote that Meta is working to recruit Gen Alpha before they reach teenage years. A 2018 email that circulated inside Meta says that you were briefed that children under 13 will be critical for increasing the rate of acquisition when users turn 13. Explain that with what I heard at that testimony at the Commerce hearing, that they weren't being targeted. And I just ask again, as the other witnesses were asked, why your company does not support the Stop CSAM Act or the SHIELD Act.
Sure, Senator. I'm happy to talk to both of those. We had discussions internally about whether we should build a kids version of Instagram, like the kids versions of YouTube and other services. We haven't actually moved forward with that, and we currently have no plans to do so. So I can't speak directly to the exact emails that you cited, but it sounds to me like they were deliberations around a project that people internally thought was important, and we didn't end up moving forward with.
Okay, and the bills, what are you going to say about the two bills?
Sure. So overall, I mean, my position on the bills is I agree with the goal of all of them. There are most things that I agree with within them. There are specific things that I would probably do differently. We also have our own legislative proposal for what we think would be most effective in terms of helping the internet in the various companies give parents control over the experience. So I'm happy to go into the detail on any one of them, but ultimately, I mean, I think that this
I think these parents will tell you that this stuff hasn't worked to just give parents control. They don't know what to do. It's very, very hard, and that's why we are coming up with other solutions that we think are much more helpful to law enforcement, but also this idea of finally getting something going on liability. Because I just believe with all the resources you have, that you actually would be able to do more than you're doing, or these parents wouldn't be sitting behind you right now in this Senate hearing room.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar.
Can I speak to that? Or do you want me to come back later?
Yeah. Please, go ahead.
I don't think that parents should have to upload an ID or prove that they're the parent of a child in every single app that their children use. I think the right place to do this, and a place where it would be actually very easy for it to work, is within the app stores themselves, where my understanding is Apple and Google already, or at least Apple, already requires parental consent when a child does a payment with an app. So it should be pretty trivial to pass a law that requires them to make it so that parents have control anytime a child downloads an app and offers consent of that. And the research that we've done shows that the vast majority of parents want that. And I think that that's the type of legislation, in addition to some of the other ideas that you all have, that would make this a lot easier for parents.
Just to be clear, I remember one mom telling me, with all these things she could maybe do that she can't figure out, it's like a faucet overflowing in a sink, and she's out there with a mop while her kids are getting addicted to more and more different apps and being exposed to material. we've got to make this simpler for parents so they can protect their kids, and I just don't think this is going to be the way to do it. I think the answer is what Senator Graham has been talking about, which is opening up the halls of the courtroom so that puts it on you guys to protect these parents and protect these kids, and then also to pass some of these laws that makes it easier for law enforcement.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. We're going to try to stick to the 7.
Would be next, but Senator Klobuchar had signed in, so sorry that she's here. And then we'll go back to Senator Moran.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Hamidi, and thank you for your work. I wanted to start out with just railway safety, something you know is big in every state. The NTSB determined that the cause of that derailment in Raymond, Minnesota, appreciate your interest in that, was a broken rail along a section of a track near the town. Can you talk about investment in tracks and how important it is and the importance of the Railway Safety Act?
Yeah, investment in rail and our rail infrastructure is an investment in safety. So certainly I would strongly support investment in rail. On the Railway Safety Act, we're appreciative to the committee for including a number of our current recommendations on rail, including expanding the definition of high hazard flammable trains, providing more information to local communities, to responders, making sure they have the gear and the training that they need to conduct their important safety mission, and certainly addressing DOT 111s. We would ask that DOT 111s, the provision be expanded even further to eliminate them from all hazmat service. One thing in particular out of the Raymond, Minnesota investigation I'll just mention is we found out with the DOT 117 tank cars, we saw that the gaskets around those particular tank cars, especially the bottom outlet valve and some others, melted. And so the lading came out, the material came out. So that's something we've recommended to be addressed in a couple of our investigations. Happy to provide more information to you on that.
Yeah, and as you know, the rail, they were there on the scene, immediate cleanup. We were fortunate not to have what happened in Ohio, and the town handled it, as did your agency well.
Yeah, they did a great job. BNSF did a great job on that as well, and it was great working with them, and I was pleased to be on the scene as well.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I remember that. It was a cold day.
It was cold. Great community, though. They all came together and brought us lots of warmth and cocoa and you name it.
Exactly. I think I'll ask on the record the NTSB's open recommendations on rail crossings, just that's something also I wanted to mention, and move to another part, air traffic control hiring. I've talked to Mr. Whitaker about this. We have a very active airport, a great airport, voted best in North America 2 of the last 3 years. And could you talk about focusing on training and hiring more controllers? He told me there's going to be a look at using military people, hiring them more often, and just the importance of that for safety.
Yeah, training, hiring is key. The FAA has set goals for hiring. What we're not talking about is the people who leave every year, which is about half. So it's a constant catch-up. Investment in the FAA also, besides the NTSB, robust, sustained investment, long-term, is key for FAA's success and for air traffic control and making sure people are hired and trained. With respect to training, we have been advocating for meaningful, value-added training and training to personnel to proficiency. The one concern I would raise with respect to the aviation industry and really across the transportation industry is we've gone to this death by PowerPoint in training, whether it is iPads or computer-based training. There are great simulators. One I just went to at DCA with respect to air traffic control that is a great training tool, hands-on for air traffic controllers, which they deserve. We have found that this move towards iPad, PowerPoint training, that employees aren't really digesting that well, even training a week ago. So it's not just providing meaningful value-added training, but really looking at how people learn. Not everybody can learn well from an iPad or a PowerPoint. So making sure that they get the training that they need that's appropriate for their positions.
Okay, very good. Next Generation 911. I'm the co-chair of that bipartisan caucus. The NTSB has issued recommendations related to 911 systems in several investigations in recent years. Can you talk about the importance of improving that 911 infrastructure? We all know people aren't just calling in on landlines anymore. They're calling in on cell phones. They want to send pictures, and there have been some improvements across the country, but there could be many more.
Yeah, I mean, they are the first responders on scene. You know, we are the investigators. So making sure that they have robust communication systems, they have the infrastructure they need, people are able to get someone on the other line, and that 911 as a whole, we have a number of recommendations on 911 operators and then also local emergency responders on coordination during an investigation and ensuring there's appropriate coordination. Happy to provide you more information on all our recommendations for that.
Okay, very good. And just one last thing on air traffic control, as our chairwoman has returned, is that Senator Braun and I have a bill to boost FAA training capacity, increase the FAA's use of its expedited hiring authority, and hope you'll look at that. I think it could be helpful. And I see Senator Moran is here as well, Madam Chairman, who's co-chair of the Tourism Caucus and has done a lot on air. So thanks.
Thank you.
Senator Moran.
Thank you very much, Senator Durbin. Thank you very much, Director Clements, for being here. I have one focus today, and that is to get this bill done. And I appreciate that Chair Durbin has called this hearing so we can talk about oversight, and I appreciate the information and the information that I know will be forthcoming in answer to some of the questions. But enough is enough. A year ago, for Cops Week, we passed amendments to the program, and we still have not marked up this program, despite having Ranking Member Graham supporting the bill, Senator Tillis, Senator Coons, many others have stated their support. It is long overdue. Yes, we get appropriations year after year. That's why you're in business, and we'll get to your good work and what you're doing. But at some point, we have to actually reauthorize this program and make very clear where we stand. The communities in my state, listen, I am supportive of Senator Booker's efforts on reform. A number of pieces of legislation, as you know, have passed in states across the country and in cities and the like. And it's very important. I come from the state where George Floyd was murdered. But at the same time, what I am seeing right now is a lack of law enforcement in the very communities that we need to help the most. They want law enforcement. In my state, in the city of Minneapolis, they had a vote on defund, and it was the communities of color that opposed defunding the police because they understood that they needed the funding. This program that you oversee adds funding to help the police. I was reminded of how important this is at a funeral that I attended of Burnsville police officers, as you know, who were just murdered in cold blood. Paul Elmstead, Matthew Ruge, as well as paramedic Adam Finseth. You know what they did? They were called to a scene in the middle of the night, and they got 7 kids out of a house in a horrible, chaotic situation. And then they were killed, and the paramedic was killed trying to rescue one of the police officers. They were heroes. So I don't think for 1 minute we should forget the officers every single day who go to work and put their own lives on the line. Reform, yes. Accountability, yes. But at some point, with the recruitment problems we're having, with the retention problems we're having, particularly in major cities in this country, we need, on a bipartisan basis, to stand with a program that does not involve increased criminal penalties. It has been a program for decades that has basically just said, we're going to help local communities to get some more police officers on the street and to bring down crime. Last year, nearly 400 different law enforcement officers relied on the COPS grant program to hire over 1,700 full-time law enforcement officers. And since its inception, the COPS hiring program has helped fund 138,000 law enforcement officers. So my first question of you, Director Clements, is can you speak of the severity of the ongoing recruitment and retention crisis nationally, which, by the way, big time includes rural areas. As people are poaching each other, they have no choice because less people are going into law enforcement. Could you talk about the ongoing recruitment and retention crisis and how the COPS hiring grants are essential to keep these departments afloat?
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your continued support of the work that we do in the COPS office and this entire committee. Thank you for your support. It's invaluable to the field. And so this convening session that we were tasked to run, along with our colleagues on the OJP side, BJA, we ran that convening session that put out some very good practical guidance to municipal leaders and police leaders on how to beef up their recruitment efforts and how to sustain retaining officers who are in their communities. And we looked with a wide lens from small and rural organizations to big, large cities like with tens of thousands of police officers. And the guidance in that publication is invaluable. And I think it will lead to greater numbers going forward, including looking at it with a wide lens, like looking at maybe take-home cars for officers, maybe relocation costs for the officers. Certainly an issue is salary and benefits in updating their collective bargaining agreements in certain communities where, I mean, police officers want to work in a community where they're supported both by messaging, and they want to work in an agency where they're supported by benefits and salaries for the difficult work they do in their communities.
You speak to, there have been a number of studies that show having the police officers there, giving them tools and technology they need, the training, which we know based on some of these cases around the country is critical. Multiple studies demonstrate that investments in police department through the COPS grant are associated with reductions in crime. Can you speak to how the evidence demonstrates that investing in law enforcement through COPS grants reduces crime?
So there have been several pieces of research and evaluations that have identified that, and I believe that, you know, and we certainly can forward all of them to this committee, members of this committee and your staff. And I will tell you, as far as the training, we do, in the COPS office, it's a three-legged stool. It's grants, so it's not only financial assistance to agencies around the country, but it's training and technical assistance, and probably most important are the publications and resources that we put out to agencies around the country. That has been a valuable tool, not only to police leaders, police agencies, but to communities. And at the end of providing all of these resources, we do surveys. And the data has been astounding as to the value received by police officers receiving that training. And the feedback from communities has been strong.
Very good. Senator Graham, now one last question here. Senator Graham asked you about fentanyl, and I have looked at this, and I know that you have been able to use, without amending the program, that you've been able to use the anti-heroin task force, COPS anti-meth program toward investigations into fentanyl as well. Is that right?
That is correct. So the
Okay.
anti-heroin, anti-methamphetamine, and it does include fentanyl as well, and it's harming to a significant degree communities around this country.
Exactly. Okay, I want to thank you, thank Senator Murkowski for leading this bill with me, our members, who've been supportive. It's time to get it marked up. And I'll just end by, at that funeral service for those officers and that firefighter, the police chaplain spoke, and he actually said, despite how difficult it is to be in policing right now, and given the solemn moment we're out of this memorial service, it is still a career worth going into, and asked young people to join the police force in the name of those 3 men. So that's what I carry with me, and that is what my mission is, to get this bill done. Wall reform efforts continue to go on across the country, but all this bill is about is making sure these grants go out and getting the information from you, which I know that you have, on the effect it has on reducing crime, the huge need right now we have for retention, as well as any other information we need. I know you do a lot of collecting of information. I hope we can get it to the members, and we can go on and mark up this bill and just stop talking about it and stop saying how supportive we are when we won't even vote for this basic federal program that has been working. So let's stop amending it and start actually passing it.
Senator Blackburn.
Right now, I'm going to focus on elections, but I will say those were startling numbers, Mr. Coleman, and I think it is just what we are seeing, both real people and AI-created people. It's one of the reasons that we got the SHIELD Act through here, which is not the liability issue that I also support, that Senator Hawley was mentioning, but also getting the information to law enforcement and the like to be able to make it easier to go after these perpetrators. And if we can just sit here and do nothing, we can pass resolutions, but unless we empower people to go after these cases and then equally make liability, it's just going to get worse and worse. And at some point, the public will have had it. I don't know if that's what this year, but it's going to happen. And so I keep telling my colleagues this. So let's go to a few things here. The bill that I mentioned that Senator Hawley and Coons and Collins and Bennett Ricketts, I have. Could you tell me, Mr. Coleman, how AI has this potential to turbocharge election-related disinformation, and why we can't just rely on the disclaimers and watermarks? I think you can do that for a set of it. I don't think you should do it for all uses of AI. And we have a labeling bill that I think differentiates that. But for this really bad stuff that Secretary of State Scanlon was referring to, tell us why it's not enough. This is softball, but to run a whole thing and have a little label at the underneath when they think it's the actual candidate, but it's not. So,
you know, we agree on that. I think that to paint the larger picture, what we saw during the primaries was a single static deepfake, pre-recorded, kind of a one-to-many attack. It didn't change. It wasn't even live. Imagine a world where that was a one-to-one attack, where instead of it being pre-recorded, it was actually live, and instead of being from one to many, it was one-to-one, where it's coming from your husband, your wife, your boss, saying, hey, Ben, we need you in the office at 6 a.m. I know it's a voting day. Or to an election official, hey, we're moving your precinct. We need you to be across town 3 hours away. And so that's where this is going to go. It's not going to be a single pre-recorded, arguably medium-level deepfake. It's going to be a real-time custom deepfake in conversational language, having people do all kinds of things at all levels of the election system. So on our side, we see this as a massive issue, not just in the US, but globally. And what's great here is on the DS, we have different technologies all solving very much the same issue. It's all possible now. We have large companies, we work with large banks, large government groups, large media organizations that are thinking long-term and already solving for this. We have banks scanning incoming phone calls, every single phone call. We don't have anyone protecting average consumers. My parents, my grandparents, they just don't stand a chance. With other technologies, whether it's CSAM or, for example, a computer virus, they don't have to be experts. They don't have to tell ransomware or an APT. They just know that their email provider will actually block it for them. We're looking for the bare minimum there, which is just letting us know that maybe something might be fake, and then allowing us to decide maybe we don't want to see it, maybe it won't go viral. But right now, the things that are most extreme go the most viral. The platforms that do think about this are already solving that using technology like ours.
Right. Very good. And I do want to note that drafting this bill, the deepfake bill, wasn't easy. We had to look at allowing satire, right, and all these kinds of things within the framework of the Constitution, and having Democratic and Republican lawyers look at this to figure out what gave us a chance. I just think if the platforms can point to something, as opposed to laws that aren't quite on point, which 11 states have done for states, but not for federal, and say, no, we've got to take this down. We're going to be in a much better place than we are with a little label that they may not even notice. And it also, the labels, you know, I think it's important for some of this, but I don't think it can be the only answer. Mr. Scanlon, you know, birthplace of democracy, no kidding. Spent a little time in your state there. I know you cherish democracy very much. Could you talk about what other federal support would be helpful in taking this on in addition to stronger laws?
Secretaries of State for a good decade now have been dealing with misinformation and disinformation generally, and that takes on many different forms. And there's no question that today voters receive their news in different formats than they did 20 years ago. And a lot of that news is electronic. It's on their cell phone. Many voters believe exactly what they see on that format, on that media, without question. So in addition to whatever might be appropriate to help states recognize and put brakes on malicious technology in terms of deepfakes, I think we have to spend a real strong effort on the fundamentals of transparency and helping voters and educating voters on the election systems and how they run and what the checks and balances are that are protecting them in the polling place.
Right. I've always found interesting, like those Baltic states on the border with Russia, they were putting up misinformation, lying things, and they, over time, because of education, they kind of have seen through some of it. It is possible. It can't be our only answer because of what everyone's being exposed to, but I think it's a good point, and we have the Election Assistance, of course, Commission. But I did want to say I appreciate, as a Republican Secretary of State, how seriously you and the Attorney General and others in New Hampshire took this egregious breach with the guy that did an interview afterward. Maybe they should have hired a mime instead of a magician. But in the end, I just think that we've got to make clear there's consequences when this happens as well. I have other questions. I don't want to go over my colleagues' time. I already have about that. I'll ask you on the record, Mr. Alma and Mr. Gupta. Thank you so much for being witnesses today. But we have to be as sophisticated as the people that are messing around with our democracy and our laws. And that's why we got to get these bills done. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Hirono.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Senator Durbin. And I wanted to clarify, I guess, with you, Professor Wong, one more thing. When we're talking about dreamers and people with temporary status, TPS, and deferred enforced departure, are we talking about people seeking asylum at the southern border right now?
No, we're not.
Okay, and what in fact are we talking about?
We are talking about people who are currently in the country, who have grown up in this country, who have known nothing but this country. The DREAM Act population is distinct from the flows that we're seeing at the southern border.
Okay, thank you. I guess I would start with you, Ms. Pacheco. Thank you so much for your testimony. I just want to use one example from my state. Carlos, he was brought to the U.S. when he was 7 months old, and he discovered when he was 11 that he was undocumented. And in high school, he received numerous awards for academic excellence. He was captain of the varsity soccer team. He earned a scholarship. He attended Carleton College in Minnesota. He was granted DACA status, and today he works at a law firm. And Stories like his are why I support a pathway to citizenship for Dreamers. They know no other country. Can you talk about why this pathway is so critical?
Well, it's critical not just for the DACA recipients and those that are fully undocumented for the Dreamers, but it's also critical for our country. Today, we have teachers, nurses, doctors, you name it, working and supporting in our economy. What would it be if we were to lose DACA in the middle of the school year and an elementary school teacher has to leave her classroom? That would be a detriment not only to her, but her children and the whole entire community that depends on her to educate those kids.
Okay, and then I guess one example, since you brought up police officers. Officer, I want to thank you for your service. You've been here for 20 years. Next week is Police Week, when we honor you and others who serve in uniform. You testified that if DACA were to end, your career in law enforcement would end. I'm well aware, carrying the cops bill, how much of a shortage we have right now in officers. Beyond your service, there's just a shortage in retaining and in getting officers and keeping them in the field. What has it been like to live with this uncertainty professionally, and talk about why you chose law enforcement when you could choose many other careers?
Like I mentioned in my story, everything happened that day of the car accident when I was with my mom, my other sister, and there are another vehicle struck us while we were driving. The way the officer explained to us everything and he talked to us, he could just be like, I'm not going to help you, and just don't explain anything. And by the fact that he knew that my mother did not speak English and my English wasn't very well, he decided to start speaking Spanish to us. So by seeing that, that's what encouraged me to be like, I want to be able to do the same. I want to be able to help my community that I grew up with and help the rest of the people here. So that's why I chose to become a police officer.
Did you ever meet that officer again and tell him that he was your inspiration?
I have not seen him, but the day that comes, hopefully one day, I get to see him again and I can let him know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Professor Wong, in your testimony, you talk about the economic impact of Dreamers. One estimate, Dreamers contribute an estimated $45 billion to the U.S. economy, and through their wages, and pay $13 billion annually in taxes. You testified that with a pathway to citizenship, Dreamers would add $2.5 billion per year in additional state and local tax revenue. Explain that and what these economic consequences are.
Yeah, that 2.5 billion number is actually a conservative estimate. So it assumes an 8.5% increase in wages post legalization. So when we're thinking about projecting economic benefits, we are thinking about what life is like economically for an undocumented person versus somebody who has legal status and can fully participate in the economy. So that $2.5 billion additional revenue per year is a conservative estimate, because that 8.5% is on the very low end of what we've seen DACA recipients produce. We actually see that DACA recipients have increased wages up to 164%. So that means that the projected increase in revenue could be significantly higher than existing economic projections.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Nobles, I'm so sorry for your loss, and I'm a strong supporter of more security at the border and hoping we can merge some of these issues and get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. I'd like to clarify one thing that is raised by Senator Cornyn about the effective date of those arrival in this country and eligibility. I introduced
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the work that we've done together on the negotiation Medicare prices. We're so pleased. I was hearing you talk, Mr. Mitchell, about Eliquis, one of the drugs, as you know, that's now being negotiated of the 10 blockbusters, with many more to come. I want to start, though, with one of the issues at a bill that still hasn't passed that Senator Grassley and I have been working on for a really long time, which I know he mentioned, pay for delay. And as you know, Mr. Mitchell, anti-competitive pay-for-delay settlements, where a branded pharma company pays off a generic or biosimilar company to delay the introduction of the competing drug product, is sadly a common practice. Our bill, it's called Preserve Access to Affordable Generics and Biosimilars Act, strikes a balance between targeting anti-competitive settlements while allowing pro-competitive patent settlements to proceed, and saving an estimated $1.6 billion over 10 years. Mr. Mitchell, you mentioned the drug that you depend on, Revlimid, which that was caught up in a pay-for-delay settlement, as I understand. How did that affect the cost of the drug for you personally? How do pay-for-delay deals keep the cost of prescription drugs high for patients generally?
I took Revlimid for 5.5 years, and during the time I took the drug, both the underlying price, and my out-of-pocket rose dramatically. By the way, Revlimid was the second most expensive drug for Medicare until it began to have competition last year to treat only 39,000 patients. The second most expensive drug for Medicare at $5.4 billion. When the drug company that owns the patent decided to let competition come on the market, it limited the generics to a lower market share, 10% each for the first two competitors. If you have a limited market share as part of the deal, you will not lower your price because you cannot gain market share. What happens then is the brand drug company and the two generics, in the case of Revlimid, shared the monopoly and the price didn't come down. This is a pay-for-delay deal. This is making an arrangement to say we won't fight you in court. Instead, we'll give you a market share limited deal, and you will make a whole lot of money for a few years while we delay real competition.
Very, very good description. Thank you. Turning to another issue that has been discussed today, that's sham FDA petitions. Dr. Feldman, this practice risks delaying the approval of generic drugs and biosimilars, imposes unnecessary burdens on FDA resources to add to everything else when they have so much to do. Senator Grassley again and I introduced a bill, the Stop Stalling Act, to give the FTC enhanced authority to crack down on abuses of this process while allowing petitions submitted in good faith to raise legitimate health and safety concerns. CBO estimates that the bill would save taxpayers $400 million over 10 years. As you know, both of these bills have gone through this committee on a voice vote. Which types of entities filed the majority of citizen petitions challenging FDA approval of generic or biosimilars, Dr. Feldman?
Brand name drug companies.
Okay, and can you elaborate on the harms to patients and competition caused when pharma companies use a citizen petition process to delay entry of competing drugs? I just find it ironic indeed when it's a citizen petition process and the citizens are getting screwed by it, but continue on.
I have felt that same irony myself. So first of all, we should say that companies are doing this because every day of delay for some of these blockbuster drugs can be worth millions or tens of millions of dollars for the companies. So there's a strong incentive to do this. And basically what happens is the brand name firms will wait until the right moment to put a question to the FDA to request that they not approve a generic medication. And it slows things down. And every day that we slow things down is more revenue for the brand name manufacturers, but it's one less day that patients get access to generic drugs. And we know that generic drugs are the number one way to lower prices in this country. It is a way to bring down costs for patients. So I think it's a good bill. And as you said, these are not citizen petitions. They are put out there by the companies for economic gain.
Last, Professor Rai, the price of 25 brand name medications that Medicare spends the most on, some of which are negotiated, of course, right now or in negotiations, have on average tripled in price since they hit the market. You have written that Medicare price negotiations will promote the entry of new drugs by reducing the incentives for brand drug companies to engage in anti-competitive patent strategies that can allow for these price increases. So this is kind of where our Medicare negotiations, that is almost a outcome of all of this bad activity, sort of hits the road and combines with this patent problem. How will requiring drug companies to negotiate prices with Medicare, as I said, with more on the road, despite lawsuits going on right now all over the country to try to stop us, which seems unbelievable to me, given that Congress is the one that made the deal, and Congress can change a deal. How will requiring drug companies to negotiate prices with Medicare deter pharma companies from playing patent life cycle games to preserve high prices and facilitate entry of competitors and further reduce prices?
So I think the Inflation Reduction Act is one of the most important patent reforms of the 21st century. And the reason is this: it finally places a time limit, at least for Medicare, on how long you can extend an old drug, which means that you have to come up with new drugs, truly new drugs. And that is a game changer, it seems to me. Now, I wish it was only more than 10 drugs, and it is increasing, fortunately, but I think that's how it spurs innovation, and Dr. Feldman noted this as well, or Mr. Mitchell noted this point as well, that it spurs innovation to prevent patent abuse.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Thank you very much, Senator Klobuchar.
Very good. Thank you very much to our nominees. Congratulations. Just wanted to, as I was listening to my friend Senator Lee, wanted to remind us of what Justice Amy Coney Barrett said during her confirmation hearing to the Seventh Circuit when questioned about her affiliation with a conservative organization that opposed women's reproductive rights, marriage equality. She said, "I don't feel like affiliation with a group commits me to all of that group's policy positions." And I just want to clarify again, you worked there briefly as a fellow and were not there during the time of these statements, or were not involved in these. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator. My limitation was just that those 2 years as part of that fellowship.
I also note that that group was originally, I'm just remembering this, started in part by a Republican congressman, Congressman Frenzel, who was interested in working with the rest of the world, and they've done some good work. Okay, let's go back to you here. You received this award, the Attorney General's Award for Exceptional Service, just recently, for dismantling a massive international sex trafficking criminal organization involving cases coming out of Thailand and Belgium, coercing hundreds of women to engage in commercial sex acts. In total, your work helped put over 36 sex traffickers away and got millions of dollars in restitution to the victims. Your efforts in this case are considered a model prosecution and used to train other law enforcement partners in how to pursue international sex trafficking and money laundering investigations. Can you talk about how you are using the lessons and techniques you developed in this case to train other law enforcement partners and protect women in future investigations?
Thank you, Senator. That was a very significant case where hundreds of women from Thailand were trafficked into the United States for countless commercial sex acts, and millions of dollars were being sent back to Thailand. So in order to combat the international conspiracy, first we had to build our team, bring together the right partners from local, state, and federal law enforcement so they had the right tools and ability to tackle that, along with a really great paralegal who assisted us on the case. We also then had to support the victims throughout. We had to connect them with services so they could participate in the investigation and testify at trial, and to build the case around them by corroborating their trafficking experiences. And then finally, we had to use all of the great tools provided by Congress, not only the Trafficking Victims Protection Act and the Justice for Victims of Trafficking, but to look at the whole story of what was happening. That included charging visa fraud, the means by which they brought the Thai women to the United States, and going after the profit motive and charging money laundering. So it's all of those tools that allowed us to build the strongest case. Over 30 of the defendants pled. 5 went to trial over 6 weeks and were found guilty on all counts. And we bring those lessons to other law enforcement partners.
Thank you. As I noted earlier, the committee received letters of support for your nomination from a dozen law enforcement officers from 5 different federal law enforcement agencies. The largest police union in Minnesota wrote a very positive letter about your work. You received support from 19 former lawyers at the U.S. Attorney's Office, including President Trump's U.S. Attorney, appointed U.S. Attorney Erica McDonald, praising your deep respect for the Constitution and dedication to ensuring justice. You've worked closely with law enforcement, and it is notable that you're joined today not only by your family, but by a special agent, Tanya Price, I see her back there, whom you worked with. Can you describe the approach you took as an AUSA to work with your law enforcement partners?
Thank you, Senator. I first had to start just learning the law, and you can't be an effective AUSA unless you have a strong relationship with the case agent and with the partners. And that's a relationship based on trust. It doesn't matter what your political views on or any personal views. We have a shared mission of protecting our children, protecting human trafficking victims, and protecting our Native communities from violence. And so when you build that shared mission and work together and build a relationship of trust, you can do amazing work together to protect the community.
Okay, and just last, I see your parents there. They're behaving very well. You grew up in St. Cloud and spent a good part of your life and not outside of the metro area of Minnesota. You have relatives all over our state. I mentioned the Iron Range. You prosecuted cases throughout our state, from the Red Lake Reservation to Mankato. Could you talk about how that experience of growing up in a place outside of a major metropolitan area and taking on cases in rural areas will help you as a judge?
Thank you, Senator. I'm a proud Minnesotan, and I've been fortunate over these past 14 years as a federal prosecutor to work with law enforcement and to work with victims from across the state. And as I've done that, I found that our similarities and our commonalities are much greater than any differences that we have. And when we work together on a common mission, we can make sure that our communities are safe, we can protect the victims, and hold the perpetrators accountable. And as you know, Senator, we have several courthouses in greater Minnesota, and I would be committed to making sure that there's access to justice and people can actually see the process when we have hearings and trials in those courtrooms.
Thank you very much.
Senator Kennedy.
Chairwoman.
Thank you very much, Senator Klobuchar, and then our cleanup hitter, Senator Bozeman.
Always
Klobuchar.
patient, always patient. Thank you, Chairwoman. Thank you, Senator Bozeman, and thank you very much for your work, Director. So, Chairman, the CFTC, we know, has very important work right now. I think since we last talked, digital asset market has grown tremendously. The market capitalization of digital assets has recovered to over $2 trillion, doubling from its recent low point. Bitcoin alone recently hit a record high of over 73,000. Despite this, there isn't really, you tell me, you believe you need more statutory authority, correct?
Senator, yes.
Okay.
Big gap.
And so that's why we're having this hearing, which I appreciate, that Congress must work in a bipartisan way to reinforce the CFTC's authority and ensure it has the necessary resources to protect consumers and maintain market stability. That includes considering legislation to regulate digital assets, protecting consumers and market participants while fostering innovation and ensuring a level regulatory playing field. That's how I think about it. I I know that some of this has been asked. I was at a hearing. We have a federal judge nominee in Minnesota, and you don't really want to leave the Senate Judiciary Committee alone on its own when you have a nominee, so that's why I'm a little late here. You have previously discussed how the CFTC has a rigorous and deep disclosure regime for commodity market participants, including what they must share with investors, that differs from securities disclosures. It's also important to ensure consumers have sufficient disclosures about the underlying assets in addition to disclosures from market participants. Is that right?
Correct.
And in other words, aren't disclosures about these assets as important as those about the entities trading them?
Correct.
Okay, good. AI is set to become one of the most significant technological advances of our time. I think it was David Brooks who said he has trouble writing about it because he doesn't know if it's going to lead us to heaven or hell. And a lot of that is in our hands. It's great potential for innovation, but we have to put some rules in place, something that a group of senators have been working on for months. We are already seeing the risks of AI in financial markets. In January, the CFTC issued an advisory warning against the risk of AI-driven crypto scams. Can you talk about the kinds of fraudulent activity you've seen with the use of AI in digital asset markets?
Thanks, Senator. It's an extremely important issue, and quickly putting aside the AI customer advisory, we've done a lot of work ourselves on soliciting comment from the industry around how AI is being used in the market, and we're taking and reviewing those comments now to ensure that we potentially consider a rule or advisory or guidance ourselves. With respect to your question, what we've observed is really, it's akin to a search engine where artificial intelligence is able to essentially track vulnerable investors, individuals across the country, and where they put their resources, how they invest their money, where they look on the internet, and are able to use artificial intelligence to essentially capture them at a vulnerable time. There's something called romance scams, which you may be familiar with, but this is a really very sad scam that's been going on for a number of years. I think the FBI noted just last year in 2023, there was over $3 billion of romance scams. And this really is preying on the most vulnerable Americans who are looking for partnership and friendship and essentially stealing their life savings. So we are very focused on that. We're working with our federal partners, but a lot of it, to your question, is driven by artificial intelligence and seeing where users are located, who has money, where they're banking, and then ultimately what their patterns are socially so that they can ultimately be taken advantage of. So we're doing our best to prevent that.
Very good. Crypto operates in two areas, correct? On-chain, decentralized users, and off-chain, centralized institutions. And most of the proposed legislation focuses on centralized platforms, not on-chain. Are on-chain activities and DeFi harder to regulate? And do you have any recs for how we should approach DeFi
Senator,
oversight?
thanks. It's a really important question, and I'm going to use an example of what we're observing. It's still very early days, but a lot of more sophisticated large financial institutions are looking at on-chain transactions or on-chain technology as a means for payment processes and settlement. So settlement, you can imagine, in a financial market is extremely important, and a lot of financial institutions are looking at blockchain and on-chain transactions as a means to make settlement or payment processes more efficient. So we are working with the industry, with other partners, and seeing how and in what way we intersect with that. There's definitely a regulatory nexus, but is it more difficult? It's certainly not centralized. The whole point of blockchain is to be decentralized. It raises very interesting policy and legal questions about what do we want to do from an elected legal perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective to properly regulate it, but not over-regulate it, because there could be potential innovations and efficiencies developed from it.
Well, thank you. If I've learned anything around here, it's don't use the ranking member's time. So I'll maybe submit another question or two on record, but I'm very glad that the chairman and ranking are working on legislation on this. I think it's time to move, and I really, really appreciate you appearing before us. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And last and certainly not
You're
least,
always
Senator Bozeman.
Always welcome to use our time. Call up for vote Schmidt Amendment 1. This amendment would prohibit the FCC, who has no legal authority at all, to impose controls on political speech. They're moving forward with that rule. Senators McConnell, Thune, Cruz, and myself wrote a letter on June 6th.
To my bill.
Recognizing this issue. This is a very dangerous road to go down. In my view, the First Amendment is not a partisan issue. We should not be empowering an agency that has no legal authority at all to censor political speech just in time for the 2024 general election.
Members, this is, we had not expected this to come up. I thought we had had a discussion about this. AI, as we know, has the potential to upend campaigns and elections unless there's some rules of the road. Today, actually, I'm calling up two bipartisan bills. One I have with Senator Hawley and Senator Collins and others on deepfakes, and then the second one is on labeling with Senator Murkowski. This is like a hair on fire moment, and given that we've seen some opposition, they are bipartisan bills, and we hope we can work through it. We don't want to then take away the authority that the FCC has had for decades to require information about political ads on television and radio to be made public, like who bought an ad, how much they paid for it, when it ran. So I would argue to my colleagues, I'm happy to talk to them about this later, but this is not the time or place to do this. And if anything, the last thing we want to do when we don't have any set rules in place on AI is to take away the authority of the FEC or the FCC to be able to continue to do their job. And I hope that our colleagues would consider withdrawing this, and we could discuss it at another time, or we could have a vote if he would like.
Madam Chair.
Senator Schmidt.
There had been a conversation about doing a study about this as long as there was a pause. There is no pause. And to the point, the FEC has come out and said that the FCC has no legal authority. So, outside of the conversation about censoring political speech from a government agency, the fact of the matter is the FCC has zero legal authority to do any of this. So if we want to study it, I'm all for it, but they need to pause it. If they're not going to pause it, this is the opportunity to, in a bipartisan way, to stand up for the First Amendment together.
I just think, again, it is the very last time we want to be setting a new precedent to limit the FCC's ability to regulate political broadcasting at this moment where we are seeing used against, whether it was former President Trump during the primary in New Hampshire, an ad that had a fake video of him hugging Dr. Fauci, or whether it was the fake robocall of President Biden's voice telling people not to vote, or whether it's the fake video of Elizabeth Warren that we saw. It's been going on all sides, and the last thing that you want to do is to limit the FCC's ability or the FEC's ability right now as we try to put some rules of the road in place. Maybe this is something we could talk about if we weren't being blocked of putting AI rules in the place of Senator Hawley in my bill to ban these deepfakes, except for parody and things that would be limited by the Constitution.
Madam Chair, ask for a roll call vote.
Thank you. Speaking against the Schmidt Amendment, I think the FCC has made it clear, it's been in the press, that they are not going to affect what happens in this election. So the desire by you to try to affect this is an admirable one, but I think Senator Klobuchar's point is that what we need to see is action that people agree on by this body, as opposed to something that might curtail the current authority of the FCC. I urge my colleagues not to support. Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Klobuchar.
Well, thank you, Maya. I know you've heard from my wonderful friend, Senator Warnock. We have votes going on, so I appreciate your understanding. Joe, thank you. We chair similar committees and working together on all this. John, truly the leader on this from the very beginning. Congressman Sewell, thank you for your leadership. I know how you will never stop until I go and speak to the Alabama delegation, which I did do in Chicago. I want to thank Damon and also Janae, Margaret, John, Monica, Christine, all the advocates. Tiffany Muller has joined us. Thank you. I think we all know that nothing is more fundamental than the right to vote. and everything has been said here, but in the Senate, as we say, I haven't said it. So I'm going to take a little different tack on the Freedom to Vote Act and, of course, the John Lewis Act. But as you all know, these bills have passed in the House, and they will pass next year when the majority changes hands. This is my prediction. But in the Senate, we did have a vote, and it was so close in terms of an exception to the filibuster for these important bills. And I just want to emphasize what that meant. We convinced 48 of our colleagues that filibuster, while some of them may still want to keep it in place, that there have been over 100 exemptions in the history of America, and that voting and civil rights should be one of those exemptions. So I want to make clear that we are still on the precipice of getting this bill done, and the needs are more than ever. We have basically seen in states camo-dressed people standing in the lines in Arizona trying to intimidate people out of voting. We saw a man who was urged on by what he read on social media try to bludgeon the Speaker of the House, then Speaker of the House's husband, to death. We have seen, as Senator Warnock probably shared with you, Saturday voting limited in Georgia, and him having to fight just to have voting the weekend before the election. We have seen states like Texas that will require only one ballot box in a county the size of my entire state. That is the kind of thing that is going on in the greatest democracy in the world, and we must keep it that way. And so I believe that our work in getting that bill in the initial vote, getting complete agreement of the Democrats in the Senate on the Freedom to Vote Act, which I thought people thought might have been impossible, but thanks to Senator Schumer's leadership, we were able to get that done. To be able to get many of our states, including my home state of Minnesota, to actually pass more of some of the reforms that were already in that bill, to be able to educate the public on what's been going on, not just in their state, but all over the country in terms of voter suppression. These are wins. But the big win is going to be for the people of this country when we get this bill passed. I just spent nearly every day of the 10-day Minnesota State Fair at the fair. And we have the highest voter turnout in the country. Sorry, so I have people come up to me all the time and say, I voted for you, thank you. Or, I didn't vote for you, but I voted and I do appreciate what you did on such and such. That's because people feel part of the franchise. And that's what this bill is about. That's how you make good laws. That's how you reach out to people. That's how they don't feel alienated, when you make it easier for them to be part of this. So I commend my colleagues. I'm excited about what the future holds in terms of what we're going to get done on these important pro-democracy bills. And I want us never to give up heart. The American people never give up heart. They're there. We got to be there. Let's get this done. Thanks, everyone.
I turn to Senator Klobuchar.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair, for this hearing. And everything's been said, but I haven't said it. That's our line in the Senate. And so I had some other things, but I'm glad to be here with all of you. Big fan of train travel and Amtrak. As I always say, it's one way my husband and I can take a vacation and not get into an argument about directions, which I like. And have been a big believer from the day that we first went to Milwaukee. My mom, that's where her parents were from. And so we would always take the train. It was then the Milwaukee Road to Wisconsin twice a year. And I knew every town along the route and got to meet the conductor and everything else. So aside from those romantic memories and the like, I think that so much of the argument we can make now is also an economic argument. And I guess I would start with you, Ms. Clegg. The Empire Builder route is one of Amtrak's longest rail lines from Chicago to the West Coast, provides a vital link for many rural towns in Minnesota. The rail line contributes approximately $327 million to the economies of the states in which it operates. And Ms. Clegg, you noted that the Empire Builder is the only passenger service to your home state of Idaho with just one remote stop. Can you speak to the economic importance of long-distance routes for rural and frontier communities? Of course, we're very excited that we've now added another route from Minneapolis, from St. Paul, actually, to Chicago. And the numbers seem really good so far. But Ms. Clegg, if you could answer. Thanks.
Thank you. Chair Cantwell, Senator Klobuchar. Long-distance service is incredibly important to the economic vitality of the West. In addition to the things that you noted on the Empire Builder that are economically important to Minnesota, I'd note that that route also serves a national park in North Dakota that otherwise wouldn't have many visitors. It also serves Glacier National Park in northern Montana, as well as the town of Whitefish. The town of Sandpine, although it only arrives in the middle of the night, is in the area in northern Idaho that is much visited by a lot of tourists, resort area. And so just that alone creates economic vitality. The other thing that's important about that route that I think is instructive for how new routes in the West could work is that it also serves as a commuter route, long-distance commuter route for many of the small communities along that route. People who live in a remote area can still work in a place that is far away because of that train. So absolutely important.
It's one of the reasons I've been advocating for this route. There's track already there between the Twin Cities and Duluth, and actually was a priority of DOT, and I've talked to Secretary Buttigieg about it, called the Northern Lights Express. Nice name. And it would be a very, very good thing and a good deal. So we're still trying to get this done.
And congratulations on the success of the Borealis. It's been great.
Yes, thank you for knowing the name of it. Another interesting light concept. I guess I go to you, Mr. Capozzi, on that. As noted, Amtrak launched the new Borealis route. It's the first time in 45 years that there's been twice daily trains from St. Paul to Chicago. Stops in Winona, Red Wing, stops in Wisconsin. As I noted, the ridership has exceeded expectations by as much as 27%, with over 47,000 riders from May to July. If confirmed, will you commit to work to improve and maintain passenger rail on these types of routes?
Yes, absolutely. As we talked before, I support long-distance travel or long-distance routes, state-supported routes, the Northeast Corridor. Amtrak is a national network, absolutely.
Good. Anyone who want to add anything?
Senator Klobuchar, let me just say, you were one of my sheroes until Vice President Kamala came, but you still
thank you. Yes.
Absolutely, I would support.
All right, very good. Mr. Battery?
Yes, Senator, the 100% increase in frequency with the new service between Chicago and Minneapolis, I think is a good news story. Time and distance breeds variability. The Seattle-Chicago train actually has delay, but with that shorter distance route between Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Chicago, I think you're going to see better regular service, in that corridor, and it will grow.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I know that Amtrak experienced its best operational performance ever in 2018, but they're still on time. I've had good fortune in the corridor, when I go to visit friends or the like. I was just in New York, and it goes well. I like it, and it's on time, but there have always been those issues. And I just talk about maybe you, Mr. Capozzi, what you think we need to do to improve on time.
I mean, part of the issue, obviously, is outside the Northeast Corridor. We're reliant on other rail providers, and so that's an ongoing issue, and that's going to take conversation, commitment, and discussions with other providers to ensure that they meet their obligations of providing priority to Amtrak. And if it was an easy issue, it would have been solved a long time ago, I think.
Yeah, well, and some workforce issues is issue for every transportation industry that comes before this committee, and we're very focused on trying to get more people into these careers. So, Very good. All right. Well, thank you. I have an apartment here that I hear the Amtrak trains when they come in, and it's very, very fun, honestly. That's why I picked it. Just keep up the good work, and let's keep expanding, especially in the middle of the country. I just think there's so many opportunities that are untapped. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar.
Submit that question to you for a written response. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thanks for doing this important hearing. So the recent CrowdStrike outage, we all know, plagued our airports, plagued our transportation, and it was caused, as we all know, by a flaw in this security update. Mr. Breo, in your testimony, you highlight the growing trend in ransomware attacks in the aviation sector. Can you speak to how investing in secure interoperable networks can protect consumers while something else was going on here with CrowdStrike?
Senator, thank you for the question. I would respond to that by saying that more investment in cybersecurity resiliency will help address not only the ability of aviation networks to resist hacking, but it would also give them resources to help train the staff who interact with those networks. I think, as most experts in cybersecurity will tell you, humans are often the weakest link in any cybersecurity chain. And so Chair Cantwell talked earlier about the need for greater hygiene to get staff and other people who interact with these networks to avoid things like clicking on suspicious links that can subject an entire network to a ransomware attack that ultimately shuts it down and has these dramatic impacts on consumers, the missed flights and things that I talked about. I think one thing that hasn't come up yet that would, I think, also play a role into this is the emerging threat of AI. We are very concerned at NCL that the bar to entry for cyber thieves to conduct these ransomware attacks is really going to be dramatically lowered because of the ability of AI to make it easier for people who may not have the same skill set that you may have needed 5 or 10 years ago to commit a ransomware attack to commit one. So the number of threat actors out there, we fear, is only going to multiply. And so the kind of investment that we need in cybersecurity resiliency is more urgent now than ever.
And Brigadier General, what additional tools and skills will our current cybersecurity workforce need to be able to deal with this?
Senator, thank you for the question. As you point out, there's certainly a shortage of IT professionals in this country. One of the things from the aviation perspective that we work very closely on is that it's hard to find IT professionals that have both IT experience and aviation experience. So in many cases, we have to bring folks in, and we provide them that additional training so they understand the specifics of aviation IT. And so that would be one thing I would say that for companies that are looking for folks to populate their team, is that you have to think about how do you internally train these folks? You know, how do you actually bring them on board and actually provide them the necessary skills to not just stay ahead, but understand the industry they're participating in.
And just last question, Mr. Little, just on the same topic, in your testimony, you note how federal agencies like Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency have helped the Seattle airport improve workforce development. I think we've got 464,000 unfilled cybersecurity jobs in the U.S. 1 in 3 of those unfilled jobs are in the federal government. Tell me what you think the federal government should do to get those numbers to be in a much better place.
So, well, we can pay people more, but one of the things I think we can do is we have to attract expertise pretty much before they start going to college, start getting them interested in the aviation industry so they see aviation as a career. And so they can start deciding on aviation career, you know, before, you know, they decide to go to some other industry.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Senator Budd.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I thank the panel for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Schumer, Leader Schumer, for calling us together. on this Project 2025, as you might say in Brooklyn, NFW, which in Minnesota means not for women or men. When you, thank you, just a nice little euphemism for us. And I want to thank my colleagues for being here. And my specific focus today is on the dangers that Project 2025, which is, by the way, not the number of felony indictments Donald Trump is facing, but in fact, what Tim Walz called the playbook at our convention, and that's what it is. And when it comes to democracy, it is truly poses a danger to our system of checks and balances. I lead with this topic because Senator Warner just had a major hearing yesterday that I suggest you look at on the threats from the outside when it comes to our democracy. With Russia and Iran, we've already seen the actual evidence of what Russia has been trying to do. Intel agencies have been warning for months that foreign interests like Iran, China, and Russia are trying to mess around in our democracy. Yeah, what does Project 2025 does? Big surprise, given that we know what Donald Trump said about Kim Jong-un, what he has said favorable about Vladimir Putin. It would actually make it easier for foreign adversaries to interfere in our elections by shutting down the cybersecurity and infrastructure security agencies' efforts to combat foreign disinformation. It said it would narrow their mission about our election and preventing U.S. Cyber Command from working on efforts to strengthen election security. You do remember that after CISA said the 2020 election, remember that, was the most secure in American history, Donald Trump fired its director, Chris Krebs, his own appointee, who had earned bipartisan support for his work to counter disinformation. It is just another proof point which is consistent with what Project 2025 says when it talks about limiting the work of this agency. Just this week, the current director of CISA, Jen Easterly, said that our election infrastructure has never been more secure, and Project 2025 would be a massive step backwards on this. It would also inject partisanship into federal agencies that are critical to protecting our free and fair elections, like the DOJ, and open the door to the weaponization of the department to harass voters and election officials. It would do this under the guise of combating voter fraud, even though experts have found that committing voter impersonation fraud is so rare that an American is more likely to be struck by lightning. Yet they are using this, to make claims about fraud and then using that to weaponize our agencies. It would open the floodgates to even more secret money in our elections by weakening campaign finance laws and calling the FEC contribution limits. This is what it says, saying they should be much higher. You've already seen what they have done in the past with the Citizens United case, making it impossible to enforce the work that John McCain had done on election laws. So there you go. It sets out in detail the plan to fire tens of thousands of civil servants without cause, those charged with protecting our health and safety, as well as law enforcement and national security personnel, and replace them with partisan loyalists. We're talking about giving one person nearly unchecked power over everything just months after the Supreme Court, and I thank Senator Schumer for his bill he has on this, already undermined the fundamental principle that no one is above the law. So let us be clear, Project 2025 poses an enormous threat to our democracy, and the words of the candidates of Donald Trump and of J.D. Vance simply have backed it up every step of the way. Thank you. Thank you for holding this important hearing on the American constitutional tradition that John Adams stood up for many centuries ago, and that is that a government of laws and not men. Simple concept. You don't even have to go to law school to know it. But I guess I'll start with you, Mr. Lacavara, who did go to law school. You served as Deputy Solicitor General and argued U.S. v. Nixon, along with Leon Jaworski. In your brief in that case, you wrote, "Under our Constitution, the people are sovereign, and the President, though Chief Executive and Chief of State, remain subject to the law." You emphasized the President, like all executive officials, as well as the humblest private citizens, is subject to the rule of law. 25 years after U.S. v. Nixon, commenting on your experience in the Minnesota Law Review, that's that was a good choice on your part.
Thank you for noting that,
Yes,
Senator.
you emphasized the president, like all executive officials as well, or you emphasized that your goal during Watergate was to enforce the obligation of every citizen, including one who just happened to be president, to comply with the law. Why do you believe the principle that no one person is above the law is a necessary cornerstone of our constitutional system of government?
Senator, I think it's implicit in the very separation of powers that Senator Kennedy was talking about. We separate powers, and the purpose for that, as the framers explained, was to ensure that government is limited. Senator Welch was talking about this as well. They chose liberty over efficiency, and I agree that it certainly would be more efficient, if that were the only goal, to allow the president to do whatever he wants to. But that isn't the system that the framers chose to embody in the Constitution, and I think they made it clear textually what they meant, and as Professor Naftali mentioned, the framers in their explanation for the Constitution said the president would be subject to various constraints, including the possibility of criminal prosecution.
Thank you. Very good. Professor McCord, independence from political interference is vital to the legitimacy and success of the Department of Justice. And I thought it would be interesting to ask you some questions about. That's why attorney generals of both parties have established clear policies to ensure that the White House does not tamper with criminal investigations and prosecutions, as Mr. McKeesey knows, or use the Department of Justice for illegal and untoward purposes. I've got concerns that the majority opinion in Trump v. U.S. jeopardizes the independence of the Justice Department. The court emphasized that, and this is the quote, deciding which crimes to investigate and prosecute is within the president's, I'm paraphrasing that part, conclusive and preclusive, those are their words, constitutional authority, an area, this is their quote, Congress cannot act on and courts cannot examine. You testified that by this logic, there is nothing stopping a president from directing the investigation of his political enemies, journalists, or activists, even when there's no basis for doing so. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, and thank you, Senator Klobuchar. You're right that, I served in the Department of Justice for well over 20 years, and under every Attorney General, as well as every President and White House counsel, these no context policies were enforced. They're not constitutionally required. It's not said in the Constitution, but it's something that respect for rule of law and has always dictated that both the White House and the Department of Justice sought to ensure that there was independence. I think that this opinion makes clear that there is nothing stopping an executive from directing his own executive branch, in particular here the Department of Justice. It's the very directions and conversations with Jeffrey Clark and others at the Department of Justice that the majority holds is absolutely immune. I do think that is dangerous going forward.
Could the court's decision mean that Congress and the courts are powerless to insulate any Justice Department official, from line attorneys to the Inspector General, from the direct partisan control of the White House?
I mean, this is the problem with conclusive and preclusive, and I would note that the case that comes from the Youngstown Steel case, Justice Robert Jackson made clear that when we are talking about a presidential claim to a power at once so conclusive and preclusive, it must be scrutinized with caution, for what is at stake is the equilibrium established by our constitutional system. And the majority opinion, which is of course the governing opinion, well more expansive than Justice Amy Coney Barrett's concurring opinion, which I think is much more well-reasoned and practically applicable, it raises these very issues that you have just posited.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The nub of the Democrats' argument today is that the concept of presidential immunity is somehow unprecedented, is somehow remarkable. That claim is utterly ahistorical and disconnected from the entire constitutional history of the Republic. General Mukasey.
Very good. Thank you, and thank you for holding this hearing. I think I'm going to start, Dr. Chen, about Amtrak here. Minnesota, you just added a route. Amtrak added a route between Chicago and Minnesota as part of the Empire Building. I would like to note that it's had ridership that no one expected. It's been very high, so we now have 2 routes. I think people like that. And so we want to just mention how important this is. And as you know, the Empire Builder route is one of Amtrak's largest rail lines, provides a vital link, contributes greatly to the economy. Can you speak, Mr. Chen, about the economic importance of long distance routes? Because I know there's a lot of emphasis on the East Coast, get it, but how important that is for rural communities.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. The Empire Builder is an impressive route. Starts out in the west, actually, Senator Cantwell, and makes its way through the upper Midwest states. And all of Amtrak's long-distance routes are of critical importance to the economies of the states through which they run. We're talking about a few elements, Senator Klobuchar. First of all, is not just the well-paying good jobs that Amtrak itself creates, but also the economic vibrancy of the towns through which these routes run. It plays an important role in generating economic growth in those towns, but also, more importantly, provides for tourism and various elements that allow people to see parts of the country that they wouldn't be able to see otherwise. And so I think that that's why long distance is an important element of this. It is because it gives people that opportunity.
Yeah, and one pitch I want to make is that there's the DOT has prioritized this Northern Light Express route from Twin Cities to Duluth, and we're still working out some details on that, but we've been trying to get it done for quite a while. So I hope it's something that you can look at. Commissioner Bensel, thank you for your work on the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, for implementing it. I understand that the Federal Maritime Commission has already received over twice as many new cases in the first 2 months of 2024 as in the entire year of 2020. Could you talk about how the Ocean Shipping Reform Act has empowered shippers to file complaints about unreasonable practices?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. It's been a big change. The market is relatively restricted in that there's only a few carriers, 10 or 11, that are internationally providing services. So there's always been a little reticence of trying to engage in protecting yourself. I think the work that you did and your colleagues did on the committee.
Senator Thune, I would note, was the lead Republican on it. Yes.
Okay. Senator Thune and you and all of those that did that set up a simplified process for challenging these complaints. I think that was the singular most important thing that occurred to change the willingness to challenge what in certain cases can be allegations of unfair treatment and penalties that would be implemented as a result of that. We've also taken some steps in the agency. Our chairman directed an audit of all of the ocean carriers to review their practices. So we sort of have a carrot and stick approach to upgrading these invoices to make sure they're fair. But there were just an immense amount, I guess, I think in total $12 billion of assessments over the course of the pandemic, when you had congestion and it was difficult to pick up cargo and retrieve cargo and put your containers back. So I give a lot of the credit to this committee on what we've been able to achieve.
Thank you. Mr. Chapman, I have worked hard on a train derailment issue in Raymond, Minnesota with the rail company, with Burlington Northern, as well as with the NTSB. Appreciate that, and glad we passed the Railway Safety Act last May. And I think I'll ask you a question on the record about that, but in my remaining time, I wanted to ask you about close calls, runway incursions. There's been an alarming number of close calls on runways in recent years. Recent collision in January at the Tokyo airport, some close ones in the US. We need to ensure planes are equipped with, of course, existing technology that would alert pilots to the presence of other planes on the runway. Could you talk about how that technology would make planes safer and what else we should be doing to ward off what could be some accidents with disastrous consequences?
Absolutely, Senator, and thank you for the question. It's not a matter of just technology in the airplane, it's also technology at the airports to ensure that we're able to detect when an incursion is occurring or is about to occur, and then ensure that the people who most need to know that are alerted, and that includes controllers, but also those operating the aircraft, the crews on board the aircraft. We have technology that can do that. We need to ensure that that technology is in place, functioning. We have an outstanding safety record over particularly the last 15 years, but there are some serious red flags that all of us are aware of, all of us are taking very seriously. We need to pursue those and ensure that we address whatever is occurring out there that is resulting in this uptick in close calls.
Very good. Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. And we did give you and Senator Thune praise for your work in getting the Ocean Shipping Reform Act before the committee and everyone's hard work, and our colleague, Congressman Garamendi, for his work in the House.
And Rusty of South Dakota, Rusty Johnson. So, but it wouldn't have happened without you, Madam Chair. So thank you for your work.
Well, thanks to everybody. I think that is the way we solve these changing supply chain issues. So we're glad that Congress, in this particular point, paid attention to give our farmers, really, and some of our other shippers, really, the type of backup that they needed to deal with international carriers. So very excited about what the FMC has been able to achieve. But again, thank you for your leadership. We will now, as we're waiting, well, I see, maybe Senator Capito, if you would like to go, that would be great. If not, I can give you a minute. So it's up to you.